أيامها من المحامي إنه في تحقيق داخلي نعمل في الجيش، وإنه إن التحقيق هذا وأوصل إنه يفضوا الاسم الجندي اللي قام في عملية الاغتيال، وبعدها يعني اختفت المعلومات كاملة.
الاحتلال ما بده يحاكم جندي لا بالسابق ولا الأول في المستقبل، يعني دولة الاحتلال أكبر شيء ممكن تعمله حتى لو أدينت تدفع فلوس، ما كثير بقضايا إنه تعويض، وإحنا ما بنحاكم جنودنا كانوا في حرب، وأنا سمعتها من محكمة، أنا كنت في محاكم أخرى موجود إنه هذه حرب، وأنت موجود في الحرب وراضي لنفسك، أنت جاي على حرب كصحفي تحمل مسؤوليتك وبتصير أنت جزء من هذا الحرب، إذا متت إحنا مش مسؤوليتنا.
إذا كانت الجهة التي تقوم بالتحقيق هي الجهة التابعة للجيش الإسرائيلي، هي أحد أذرع الجيش الإسرائيلي، فهي بطبيعة الحال ستحقق في الملف بطريقة التي تحمي روايتها. حتى لو توجهنا إلى الجهاز القضائي، على فرض الجهاز القضائي الإسرائيلي، الجهاز القضائي الإسرائيلي يتعامل بنفس العقلية.
من المعيب والمهين لأي جهاز قضائي أن يشكل نطاق قانوني لما يمارس من جرائم حرب وجرائم ضد الإنسانية، بالذات يعني إذا استهدفت المدنيين، وتحديدا إذا استهدفت حرية الرأي والتعبير.
Al Jazeera contacted the Israeli army, asking them to respond to the allegations made in this film, including the targeting of journalists, suppressing evidence, and covering up for their soldiers' actions. An army spokesman replied and talked at length about, quote, activities of a combat nature, but didn't refer to any of the journalists by name. Al Jazeera followed up with a second, more recent request for comment, but the Israeli army did not reply. Several months after the death of Shireen Abu Akleh, the Israeli army had still not admitted to her murder. So Al Jazeera Media Network submitted a formal request to the International Criminal Court in The Hague in December 2022 to investigate and prosecute those responsible. Al Jazeera's own investigation had found that Israeli forces had fired directly at Shireen and her colleagues and submitted this to the ICC. It also refuted the Israeli claim that Abu Akleh had been killed accidentally. The International Federation of Journalists and the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate also filed a joint complaint at the ICC over Israel's targeting of journalists and failure to fully investigate any of the cases. These included the killing of Yasser Mutaja and Ahmed Abu Hussein in Gaza, and the injuries to Muad Amane and Nidal Shteye in the occupied West Bank.
شهر 9 ب20/9 بالضبط قدمنا الملف لمحكمة الجناية الدولية، تعرضنا لمضايقات لوجستية، ولكن بالنهاية سلمنا الملف نحن والاتحاد الدولي، وبالتالي عندنا غطاء ومظلة دولية لتحركنا الدولي. سلمنا هذا الملف، وكان معنا توني أبو عاقلة أخو الشهيد شيرين، وكانوا الجزيرة مشكورون، يعني عندهم تغطية مميزة للموضوع. ب6/9 أجأتنا رسالة بسلمك إياها، يعني بما معناه إنه بدأنا بالإجراءات، ولكن نحن نعتبر ذلك غير كافي.
This is that letter from the ICC to the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate, which thanks them for the information and says it will be sent, quote, to relevant staff members for further review. However, the ICC only investigates crimes committed in Palestine since the 13th of June 2014, when the Palestinian Authority accepted ICC jurisdiction.
هناك نص واضح وصريح في ميثاق روما الخاص بالمحكمة الجنائية الدولية يتحدث بشكل بسيط واضح وقاطع أن المحكمة الجنائية الدولية لا تنظر بقضايا بأثر رجعي، بمعنى أن الدولة منذ التصديق والتوقيع على ميثاق روما فقط يتم النظر في القضايا المتعلقة بها، ولا يتم النظر في القضايا السابقة لذلك.
طبعا احنا فكرنا نتوجه المحكمة الدولية، وهو لازم يعني انه تم توجه المحكمة الدولية، لكن للاسف ما في اي حدا اهتم في الموضوع، ما حدا قدم يد العون، ما حدا طلب منا ورقة واحدة لغاية الآن. للاسف انه يعني نقابة الصحفيين لغاية الآن لم تطلب منا ورقة واحدة عن الموضوع، رغم علمهم بأن الملف تسكر أكثر من مرة.
نحن نحاكم الاحتلال على مبدأ الجريمة التي ترتكب بحق الصحفيين الفلسطينيين، وأيضا ما هو مصير الذين لم نرفع، يعني مثلا نزيه دروزي مثلا من اللي قبل 2014 زي ما حكيت، فضل شناعة، وفي بين 2014 2023 كمان في ناس ما حطتش أسماء، ولكن المبدأ نريد أن نحاكم عليه مبدأ جرائم ضد الصحفيين الفلسطينيين، وهي الاحتلال يصف والقانون الدولي يصفها بأنها جرائم حرب. طب اليوم جريمة شيرين يمر عليها تقريبا ماذا فعلت المحكمة الجنائية الدولية؟ نلاحظ أن هناك تلكؤ وتباطؤ، نريد أن نعرف هل هذا هو سببه سياسي، ولكن نريد أن نضغط.
من الواضح أن المدعي العام المحكمة الجنائية الدولية السيد كريم خان أو مستر كيكي منذ أن تولى هذا الأمر قبل حوالي عامين وأصبح مدعيا عاما للمحكمة الجنائية الدولية، من الواضح أنه يمارس التسييس والانتقائية بصورة كاملة في التعامل مع الملف الفلسطيني. هو يعني فعل في ملف أوكرانيا وأقام الدنيا ولم يقعدها، وخلال عام واحد كان بوتين قد أصدر ضده أمر اعتقال، وكانت الاتحاد الروسي قد صدر بحقه عشرات من العقوبات، 6 موجات من العقوبات المتلاحقة، وفي الشأن الفلسطيني لم يتحرك مليمتر واحد حتى في مستوى الاتصال والتواصل مع المحامين أو مع الضحايا أو زيارة المناطق أو حتى إعطاء تصريح واحد عما يدور في الأراضي المحتلة من جرائم حرب وجرائم ضد الإنسانية.
Al Jazeera contacted the ICC asking it to respond to the allegations made by Abu Bakr and Sourani against the ICC and prosecutor Karim Khan. The ICC prosecutor's office replied saying, since the beginning of his term, the prosecutor has put in place a dedicated team to advance the Palestinian investigation. The prosecutor has also publicly stated that he intends to visit the state of Palestine this year, and the OTP is making every effort to achieve this objective. They added, the office continuously monitors a range of events related to the situation in Palestine, including recent ones. The office does not comment on details or specific steps relating to the investigation due to its confidential nature and the need to preserve the integrity of our processes, as well as the safety and security of all those concerned.
الخوف أنا عندي بأنه بيوم من الأيام يصير ضغط من السياسيين وأنه يسحبوا القضية زي ما صار مع قضايا ثانية. ممكن لهيك بغيبونا شوي عن تفاصيل اللي عماله بصير في هاي القضية.
ولكن سيد ناصر هناك تخوف من قبل الضحايا أو عدد من الضحايا من أن يؤثر مسار الضغوط السياسية على مستقبل ومآلات هذا المسار القانوني في محكمة الجنايات.
طبعا نحن نقابة صحفيين مستقلة تمثل الصحفيين الفلسطينيين وحقوقهم، وهذا عهدنا لكل الشهداء ولكل الجرحى، وبالتالي هذا لا يمكن أن يتم. ولكن أيضا في مسألة ثانية، نحن شركاء، نحن والاتحاد الدولي للصحفيين،
حتى لو تم ممارسة الضغوط على السلطة الفلسطينية
واحنا مش معنيين بالموضوع. وأنا بعتقد أن موقف السلطة واضح. أنا ليس ناطق باسم السلطة إلا متحدثين، ولكن أنا بقول لك بشكل واضح، لا، تصريحات كل القيادة الفلسطينية على رأس الرئيس أبو مازن إنها التوجه للمحكمة الجنائية الدولية، وأعتقد إنه في الأيام الأخيرة قدموا ملفات أو ستقدم ملفات أخرى على الاحتلال، وبالتالي موضوع المحكمة الجنائية هذا مسار بدأ ولن يتوقف القطار فيه.
Tamar al-Meshal asked Chris Cobb-Smith if he thought the ICC lawsuits would eventually see someone charged and tried for the journalists' murders.
Well, I'm not sure whether it'll work, but I absolutely believe this should be the next step for all these murders, all these killings, to be taken to a higher court, to be looked at again. Because in all the cases that I've looked at and been involved with, it still feels to me like an unfinished story. I would like to see the next step taken. I'd like to see all these cases reinvestigated and come up with some sort of resolution or some definitive finding.
كل يوم بنفكر في الملف فضل ملف كعائلة مش ناسينه، ما زال الملف على الطاولة، ما زال الملف مفتوح في انتظار العدالة.
أنا بالنسبة لي ما عندي مشكلة أوصل يعني لأي محكمة في العالم، بسبيل إنه أنا أثبت حق والدي في هاي الجريمة اللي تم اغتياله في دم بارد، وفي سبيل إنه إحنا نحمي هالشباب الصحفيين اللي في الميدان حاليا. من أول لحظة إنه يعني كان بذهني إنه نقدم هذا الملف مش من اليوم، من قبل يعني للمحكمة الدولية، ولكن إنه التقاعس اللي صار في الفترة الماضية أحال إنه بيننا وبين تقديم الملف للمحكمة الدولية، لأنه ما تم تبني هذا الملف حتى في النقابات السابقة وفي المجالس النقابية السابقة ما حدا طرق بابنا إنه يقدمه بشكل قانوني.
العقبات اللي ممكن احنا من خلالها يعني نحس انه فعليا قضيه ياسر مش ماشيه، اللي هو عدم تبرير الاحتلال لقنص او استهداف او قتل ياسر او الصحفيين ما بعده. بحاول دائما يتهرب من الموقف، بحاول يعني يبرر الروايه الاسرائيليه، دائما بحاول انه يظهر انه انت متعدي عليه، وفعليا انت فعليا ما بتكون بتقاتل الا بكاميرتك.
يعني بعد الاصابه حياتي انقلبت 360 درجه، خلص ما يعني صفيت زي ختيار التسعيني، خلص من الحياه ومش ضايل عنده كم شغله بده ينجزها قبل ما يرتحل، او كطفل صغير بده يعيش الانبساط عبين ما يصل لهموم الحياه. يعني بحاول انسى قديش بقدر الاشي اللي صار معي لحتى ما اضل عايش بهم الرصاصه الموجوده براسي اللي ممكن باي لحظه تتحرك او تسبب لي مشاكل كبيره، تفقدني القدره على انه اتعامل مع الناس اللي حوالي، اقدر اتعامل مع الناس اللي حوالي. فلهيك بحاول انبسط قديش بقدر لحد ما ربنا يفرجها.
On the eve of World Press Freedom Day in 2023, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the media were under attack across the world and urged every nation to stop the targeting of truth and those who report it. He called freedom of the press, quote, the foundation of democracy and justice. On the first anniversary of Shireen Abu Akleh's death, Al Jazeera Media Network renewed its demand for accountability in her killing and said that only an independent and impartial investigation can reveal the truth behind her murder. When they operate in conflict areas, journalists know they're at risk. But they also expect that governments and their military will observe international and human rights law to try and ensure their safety. To do otherwise is a potential violation of media freedom and their ability to report the facts in pursuit of the truth.
A revolutionary South Sudanese leader who fought in a brutal 21-year civil war and went on to become Sudan's first vice president.
A new Sudanese commonality to which we all identify.
What happened next is still a mystery. Al Jazeera World tells the story of John Garang, a mysterious death on Al Jazeera. brought to you by Visit Qatar.
Hi there, let's go with your weather update. And right off the bat, we've got to talk about this tropical storm creeping closer to the Philippines. So let's go in here for a closer look. This is going to throw quite a bit of rain to eastern Visayas and eventually Luzon, as well as those outer bands lash the eastern side of the Philippines. But this storm system looks to track toward Taiwan in the days to come. So this will be in the headlines for us over the next little bit. Now for China, some wet weather locked into Fujian province, crossing over the East China Sea. That wet weather also pours into the Korean Peninsula. And then we've got this storm system trying to wind up in northeast China. So that means a soggy forecast for Harbin, for example, on Sunday. Now with all of this said, for this part of Southeast Asia, much quieter. We do have some pulses of rain for West Sumatra Island in and around Padang, for example. Australia, it's the middle of winter, fairly quiet conditions here. Gloomy, though, for the southeast corner. And with a breeze off the water here, I think that's going to induce some showers for places like Sydney and Brisbane over the next few days. We'll end this weather report in New Zealand right now. Heavy rainfall warnings in play for Christchurch, and we've got some snow for the mountain passes in the Southern Alps on Sunday. That's your weather update. We'll see you soon. Take care.
The weather, brought to you by Visit Qatar.
Spain will hold a snap general election on July 23rd, as the Conservative People's Party looks set for power in coalition with the far right. Can the current Socialist Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, rally enough support to see off the challenge? Follow the Spain election on Al Jazeera.
Hello, I'm Nick Barker. This is the News Hour live from Doha. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, thousands in Israel protest government proposals to change the powers of the judiciary ahead of a vote in the Knesset. 16 civilians are reported killed in Sudan as fighting intensifies on multiple front lines, including Darfur. A massacre in Myanmar. The opposition accuses the military of killing 14 people in a raid as fighting flares across the country. And a Russian journalist is killed in southern Ukraine. Moscow says cluster munitions were used.
And I'm Peter Simmert with your sport. Lionel Messi makes a perfect debut for Inter Miami, and the USA are off to a winning start in their defense of the Women's World Cup.
Warm welcome to you. We begin this news hour in Israel, where tens of thousands of people are protesting government-proposed plans to change the powers of the judiciary. At least a dozen protests are happening across Israel, including in Tel Aviv. That's for the 29th week in a row. 10,000 military reservists say they're suspending voluntary service. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right government has revived a campaign to curtail some of the Supreme Court's powers. Mohammed Jamjoon is there in Tel Aviv.
All of the protesters that are out this evening in Tel Aviv are opposed to the very controversial plans of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to try and overhaul the judiciary of Israel. This is the 29th week of protests. There's a massive amount of people here already, and it's expected the numbers will only grow. And this is not the only demonstration that's taken place today. There have been at least 12 other demonstrations throughout the country, including tens of thousands of people that were marching from Tel Aviv, making their way to the Knesset in West Jerusalem, where they will demonstrate against the debate that is scheduled to start Sunday on the potential passage of a very controversial bill that would see, critics say, the oversight powers of the Supreme Court weakened substantially if it were to pass. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu says he is committed to continue with these plans, and that once this bill passes, he will then step back and try to seek compromise with opposition parties. But that's not good enough for the thousands upon thousands of people that are out across Israel who say that this is a real threat to democracy, and that if these plans are put in place, it will take Israel away from democracy and put it on a road to autocracy. Mohammed Jamjoon, Al Jazeera, Tel Aviv.
All right, let's drill down into this story now with Uri Miskav, who's a reporter and commentator at the Haaretz newspaper. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. A warm welcome to you. As we heard there, an awful lot is riding on what happens next. But firstly, remind us of what's at stake here. What do protesters maintain will happen if this bill does become law?
Yes, we're in dramatic, even historical days in Israel, celebrating its 75 years of independence. But many people talking really about a civil war here, a clash of civilization between the liberal democratic camp and the more conservative right-wing nationalistic camp. Very dramatic days, and I have to correct your numbers, if I may. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of demonstrators only in Tel Aviv. I've just got back from the huge rally. It's about 250,000, 10,000 more in Jerusalem, and other smaller demonstration in the cities of Israel.
Now, the pressure is mounting, of course, on Benjamin Netanyahu, especially given that 100 of Israel's former security chiefs have signed a letter urging him to scrap the legislation. Thousands of military reservists say they will no longer report for duty. This poses a real security challenge for the Prime Minister, doesn't it?
It's more than a security challenge. It's even sovereignty challenge. We never had anything going like that in Israel. Usually the reserve army, the people's army, is very loyal, very obeying the government. We never had a clash like that. And may I remind you that it's not only a clash from inside, but also from the White House and from the Congress and from President Biden, who reportedly told Netanyahu to halt and stop everything before a big crisis happens between America and the States, between Israel and the States.
Is it really realistic to assume that this bill could be halted, or could it be watered down? What are the options for the Prime Minister?
From what I hear in the last couple of hours, Netanyahu is stubborn in pushing to the end, getting this into a clash. He actually can't maneuver within his right-wing extreme government. And what we're going to see in the next couple of days is the drama will go to the Knesset, to our parliament, where after 1 or 2 days of very stormy discussion, it will probably be approved in the parliament, but then immediately will go to the Supreme Court. And to my opinion, the Supreme Court will cancel these new laws. And then we really going into what we call in Israel a constitutional crisis. Who is the sovereign? Who has the last word? Is it the Supreme Court, or is it the government that canceled the Supreme Court ability to control it?
Now, of course, while this outrage continues, of course, the demonstrators are keen to protect their civil liberties and the independence of the judiciary. Of course, Palestinians, though, are going to be looking at this thinking, where is your outrage about how we are being treated by a government accused of building an apartheid state?
And it's even more complex than that, because when we're talking about Palestinians, we have to divide. We're talking about Palestinians that are citizens of Israel within Israel, official borders, what we used to call Arab Israelis. And we have the Palestinians in the West Bank, the occupied territories. So it's two different groups, but the same people, and they're all looking at this and not really taking part. The Palestinians over the Green Line in the occupied territories, of course, don't have any business with that. But the Israeli Palestinians are also suffering this huge wave of crime and murders, and they're not taking part in the protest. They're not taking sides here. They're concentrated in their own internal crisis.
Uri Misgav, many thanks for joining us on the news hour. Uri Misgav there, of course, from Haaretz newspaper.
Good night.
Well, as those Israeli protests continue about upholding democratic institutions, violence in the occupied West Bank is escalating. Funerals have been held for 2 young Palestinians killed by Israeli forces in separate shooting incidents on Friday. 18-year-old Fazi Makalfa was shot and killed in Sebastian, northwest of Nablus. Israel says a car carrying 2 teens attempted to run over Israeli troops. Separately, 17-year-old Mohammed al-Bayed was shot during a protest near Ramallah. And Laura Khan has more from Ramallah.
2 Palestinian teenagers were killed in 2 separate incidents in the occupied West Bank on Friday. But one of them, there's very contradictory statements as to how one of the teenagers was killed. His name is Fawzi al-Makhalfa, 18 years old, from the town of Sebastia. That's just northwest of Nablus. Local sources say he was driving home with a friend when the Israeli army started shooting at them. The windscreen is riddled with bullet holes. He was shot in the head and taken away by Palestinian ambulances where they pronounced him dead. His friend was lightly wounded and taken away and arrested by the Israeli army. Now, the Israeli army statement is somewhat different. They say there was a runover attempt, essentially a car ramming attack, occurred against a military force in Sebastia. So it responded by shooting at the 2 suspects who were traveling in the vehicle. The driver of the vehicle was, in their words, neutralized, meaning killed, and another suspect was injured and arrested. The Palestinian Authority is calling it an execution and is also calling for an investigation into this. The other teenager who was killed is called Mohammed al-Bayad. He's from Jelazon refugee camp. He was shot in the head during a protest against an illegal Israeli settlement and also an uptick in settler violence. In the occupied territory so far this year, 202 Palestinians have been killed. 165 of those are in the occupied West Bank. So the numbers give a sense of the grim reality on the ground here.